So the Vince McMahon documentary has finally released, and it's pretty damn interesting. Very interesting and very freaky, off the wall, totally crazy, but still interesting. This first episode is called Junior, and basically, I'm going to be breaking down these episodes from an episode to episode basis just to give me like a chance to give my full thoughts, breakdown on everything, cleanse my soul and my mind after watching these episodes because, man, just the first episode, it's been a trip. It's been pretty damn crazy. And yeah, just like how it all started, like with Mr. McMahon walking into the ring, like how he entered the ropes, and like I felt like his body looked so stiff and his face, and he's like, he sits in the chair, he's like, well, I never really talked about myself before. And it's like, okay, here we go. It's like this is the roller coaster ride about to start. It's just so unsettling and freaky how he looks. Now I know he's been in the ring before, he's taken crazy bumps and all that stuff, and we got to give him props as well because for someone in their mid 70s to have like that type of physique, still be like pretty damn jacked and stuff like that, it's impressive. It's very impressive despite whatever he's doing on the side. We all know whatever, something might be going on in many ways, but despite all that, he has a really good physique, so props to him for that. But then after he sits in the chair and he says that, just the whole musical tone and the setting of everything, you have that, and then it's just the creepy vibes are setting in already, because then you have Linda in the chair getting ready for her interview. You got like Hunter, then Steph, Shane, basically the whole McMahon family, and this creepy tone is playing, and you're like, dude, this is like, feels like something akin to like the OJ Simpson trial or something. It just feels like absolutely like over the top and creepy and crazy, especially everything we've learned and everything that I would say, if you've been a longtime wrestling fan, you've probably kind of had an inkling and a feeling that this is kind of like a interesting family and definitely interesting sadistic individual, Vincent Kennedy McMahon Jr., that is, as we're going to cover here. So we have that, they're getting prepared, they're getting ready, it looks like super creepy, and then Vince looks at the camera and he claims like no one knows the real him. And it's like, that's followed by people like Steph and Triple H. They also give that feeling like, no one knows the true Vince McMahon. But in my opinion, is that really true? Because, like I said, if you're a longtime wrestling fan, or even if you're a wrestling fan now that's watched clips back on the network, Peacock, online, whatever, you would know that Vince McMahon has had a reputation for not looking like the most sanest of individuals. There's been so many crazy stuff that has happened in the WWE over the past 30 years pretty much, maybe even longer, and you just know from all those things that this guy has probably tons and tons of friggin' skeletons in his closet. They're just friggin' knocking on the door, and he kind of just has these things swept under the rug, and you kind of know what's happening, but you don't know because you haven't heard any proof really. But now we're starting to hear proof. So it was always like so much stuff over the years that kind of happened in quotations, but we as fans and outsiders never had any concrete proof, if that makes sense. I know I might be talking in circles or all over the place, but still the story is like absolutely crazy, and it's just astonishing, especially as a longtime fan. It's kind of hard to talk about this stuff because you're a fan of it, so you're conflicted of being a fan of something, but also it was created by this emperor sadistic heinous crazy individual pretty much. It's like you're watching one of your favorite movies. Maybe it's like The Unusual Suspects, but then you heard what happened with Kevin Spacey. It's like, oh, do I really like that movie anymore because of, yada yada yada, whatever happened there. So that's how it is. It's like Steph and Triple H might say we don't know the real Vince McMahon, but I think we have a pretty goddamn good idea who the real Vince McMahon is, because there's been so many hearsay over the past like 30 years, let's say, and enough of these arrows are pointing in the same direction pretty much, you know what I mean? And if enough arrows point in the same direction, eventually those arrows make a line, and the tip of that arrow is pointing straight to the creepy mofo Vincent Kennedy McMahon Jr. So there's going to be a lot of talk between Vince McMahon Jr. and Senior here, so I'm going to try my best to say Jr. when I'm talking about the Vince we know, and Senior, which is his dad, who's the one who started the World Wrestling Federation pretty much. So there is that. And I just liked the other part of the interview when it showed Bret Hart, because we all know Bret. Like, Bret is someone who pulls no punches. If he's being interviewed about Goldberg, Shawn Michaels, Triple H, Vince McMahon, the WWF, WWE, whatever, Bret is a straight shooter pretty much. And I just love that. Whether you like it or not, Bret is going to give his opinion, and that's just how it is. And it's just like, you could tell that Bret Hart has a huge passion for the wrestling business. The way he talks about the situations, how he explains things about fellow wrestlers, family members, matches, and so on. Like, Bret has so much passion, but you could also tell that he's left very jaded from his experiences, because in a lot of ways he has been jaded, and in many of those moments that caused him to be jaded were by Vincent Kennedy McMahon Jr. And if we could get into it, of course there's the famous Montreal Screwjob, which happened in November 1997. He's fighting Shawn Michaels for the championship belt. He was defending his championship belt against Shawn Michaels in Montreal, but he also signed a contract to WCW. So he was asking Vince if he could, win or drop the title. I forget exactly what, but basically the match just ended abruptly when Shawn Michaels put Bret Hart in the sharpshooter, which was Bret Hart's finishing move, submission move. And as soon as Shawn Michaels put Bret in the sharpshooter, Vince McMahon, was telling Earl in the headpiece, or he was telling the ring bell boy to ring the bell. The bell was ringing, and that was live on pay-per-view. And Bret was friggin' pissed, and they made a whole documentary about it called Wrestling with Shadows. So there was that, which was pretty huge and pissed Bret off for many, many years. And then even more on top of that, 2 years later, in May of 1999, you had his brother, Owen Hart, die live on pay-per-view over the edge in the WWF. And that happened when he was on top of the rafters, like at the height of the building. He was playing a character called the Blue Blazer, and the Blue Blazer would come down on a ripcord, kind of like Sting did in WCW. But Owen really didn't want to do this stunt. He didn't want to do it. He was very apprehensive, but Vince McMahon was the one who pushed him to do it. He didn't physically push him, but vocally Vince was very convincing and forceful. And Vince is like, you got to do it. You got to do it. Owen was very uncomfortable, but he ended up doing the stunt. But during the stunt and the free fall, the cord released somehow, and then Owen went crashing down onto one of the turnbuckles and pretty much died. Pretty much, I think it was instantly. It was very quick, and they tried to resuscitate him. They had paramedics on scene, of course. It was a sports event, so they had that. But Owen pretty much died very shortly after. And then Jim Ross, they had JR and the King as the two main commentators. So Jim Ross announced to everybody on the live pay-per-view broadcast, and I don't know if it was piped through the building or not, but definitely on the pay-per-view broadcast, if you were watching, he said Owen Hart has died. And he's passed away, and it was horrible. But you know what? We're going to continue the show. And I think that was like the second or third match on the card, so there were still like 4 matches left. And the decision to continue the show was Vince McMahon's. So, I mean, Brett has a lot of reasons to be pissed and not like Vince McMahon, but also a lot of reasons to just be jaded and hurt by the wrestling business in general. So, I've always liked Brett, and it's just kind of sad to talk about all that stuff. It's just how it is, but I like Brett because he's a straight shooter and he doesn't hold back. So that's what happened there. So back to the Netflix doc, all of a sudden after the interviews with Brett, Steph, Triple H, Shane, and such, there's like a statement on screen from Netflix. And it's like, we've had to halt production at this moment before the last interview with Vince McMahon, because as of June of 2022 was the big Vince McMahon scandal. You remember 2 years ago now, there was a hush money scandal involving, Janelle Grant, I believe her name is. And that was the start of everything. So that happened during the filming of this documentary, because I believe this documentary started filming in 2021, if I'm not mistaken, but then it went into 2022. But then in the summer of 2022, we had that hush money scandal come up about, and they had to halt production. And what a time to halt production, because all the shit was hitting the fan. Well, yeah, no pun intended, but you know what I mean by the S word. So that happened, right? The timing was absolutely crazy. And I'm pretty much like really excited to see where the next episodes go after this, because I really hope that Netflix, there's litigations and there's probably a lot of red tape and things that you can't mention with the lawsuit. But then again, like, just the fact that they started the documentary off the bat like that was pretty awesome. So I really, really liked to see that. And I'm really excited to see where they go on from there pretty much. So after the halted production text thing by Netflix, we then go back to Vince McMahon sitting in the chair, and he delivers such a creepy line. Like, it's so freaky. And he basically says, I don't want anyone to know the real me. I don't want anyone to know who I really am. Like, basically he's covering his tracks, or he's like, I don't know, the way I insinuated it, it's like he's some creepy supervillain or something. And I mean, that's easier to justify after everything we've learned, right? So it's like, no freaking kidding. After everything we've learned after the past couple years, and even like I said, if you've been a wrestling fan for a long time, or if you've watched the product back on WWE Network, Peacock Online, whatever, you would know there's so many segments that make you suspicious of what the hell's going on. There's like the segment with Vince and Trish leading up to WrestleMania X7. Houston, we have a problem. 2001 viewership was at its peak in wrestling, ratings, everything. But then he's making out with Trish in front of his wife, Linda McMahon, who's in a wheelchair, all zombified. This is all part of storyline. But the way he's making out with Trish, with the tongue and everything, it's just so over the top. Even as like young kids, we're like, okay, what's happening here? This is wacky, entertaining, but also there's got to be something happening. And then a year later, when he signs Tori Wilson from WCW, after that whole invasion angle, when WCW closes, a lot of the stars from WCW came to WWE. Well, Tori Wilson was one of them. And there was just like all these backstage segments of like Tori and Vince, and Vince is just in a dress shirt and it's like his underwear, and he's got it like half on, and she's like stripping him and all that. He backs her against the wall, and then they start making out passionately. It's like what's the point of it? Like what's the story being served here? So the wheels started turning more and more, and as each year went by, he would like do it with different divas, pretty much like different women wrestlers from the roster. So it's like you're the one pulling the strings, you're the chairman, the CEO, boss, and everything. So obviously there's something going on here. So just hearing him saying that line, it's like you don't want us to know the real you, but we already had a pretty damn good idea. And now, after all the allegations and the lawsuits and everything, we have a pretty drawn up conclusion, even if it's in big quotations. Allegedly, we know the truth. You know what I mean? So there is that. And, then we get a synopsis of basically how Vince grew up in a trailer park up until the age 12. So he had like a really abusive stepfather, and his family wasn't that good at all. So he pretty much like grew up with nothing up until being 12 years old. And then he went back to his dad, which I find really weird. And at 12, he went back to his real dad, Vince McMahon Sr. And Vince McMahon Sr. is the first owner of the WWF or WWF. A lot of W's. It's very confusing. But just to simplify it, we'll call it the WWF. So Vince McMahon Sr. was the owner of that. And Vince McMahon Jr. at 12 years old comes back into his life. And they have like a really strange relationship because it's like, where have you been this whole time? But then as soon as he meets his dad, they're already talking business. And then eventually Vince Sr. tells Vince Jr., you could work for my company, the wrestling company, up in Bangor, Maine, up north in the USA, the East Coast. You could work as an announcer and start there, and we'll see how things go. And I mean, Vince McMahon really took a liking to it. He did his best. He was announcing. He was dedicated. He was showing up constantly. And that's how it was. Basically, he was very dedicated to the business, and his dad liked that. He was impressed by that in some way, but he wasn't in other ways, I guess, because the way Vince talks about his dad, like he enjoyed the opportunity to work for his company, but he also seems like that he wasn't appreciated. So he didn't really enjoy working with his dad either. I guess that's how I understood it anyways. Like, him and his dad basically didn't have a good relationship, even though like Vince got his start from his dad pretty much, because that's how he got the WWF eventually and turned it into the WWE and so on. So basically he worked as the announcer for his dad, and then over time Vince Sr. was looking to sell the company, the WWF, but he's looking to sell it to someone known as Gorilla Monsoon. If you're a wrestling fan, you'll know who Gorilla Monsoon is. He used to be a wrestler, but he also became like one of the execs in WWF after. And he was a cool guy. He was great. But I think what happened was Vince ended up proving to his dad that he could buy the company by paying like every month out of his salary, like the expected returns that the wrestling company would make. So he's basically giving his dad money for working for him, which is pretty crazy. But he did that, and then eventually Vince took over. And once Vince McMahon Jr. took over, as soon as he took over, he amped the production up like huge. And this is the one thing, like one of the things that I'll give props to Vince McMahon for, is the production value of the wrestling of WWF went up huge after he took over. And it's always been the case. Like when it comes to production value, like the WWF, WWE, whatever, it's always been the cream of the crop, you know? When you compare it to WCW back in the day, WWE always had the better production value. When you compare WWE to AEW today, WWE has way better production. Like they're both broadcasting in 1080p, you know, the codecs, the bit rate, whatever, all the technical terms, all that. But it's like the hardware or something, the lighting, the music, the costume design, makeup, everything that WWE comes up with is pretty much cream of the crop, and it's so damn good. It's like watching a AAA TV series or movie in the theaters every time you tune in, which is like a weekly product, right? So that's like one thing for sure that I'll give to Vince McMahon is the production value. It's always been so damn good when it started with Vince. You know, he started talking in front of TVs and it was like old school back then, but then he would come up with these over-the-top characters and different things like that, and the music and the vignettes and the promos and everything like that. It was just so over the top, but Vince McMahon Jr. was a true pioneer for that, in my opinion anyways. That's what I think about that. But then we come to the territories, and this is a hot subject, kind of like a sensitive subject for a lot of people, because if you know your wrestling history, there was something called the territories back in the day, back in the Vince Senior days, Vince's dad. Back in those days, you could say, like, I guess the 70s, we could say, there was wrestling territories. So, for instance, you have California, they had their own wrestling company. You go down to Texas, they had their own wrestling company. You go to like the Mid-South or whatever, they had their own wrestling company. And the WWF up in like Maine, Connecticut, New Hampshire, etc., they had their own wrestling company, the WWF. So there were these territories and like borders pretty much. And it's kind of like a, you know, respected thing, kind of like a handshake deal between the different, you know, chairmen and CEOs, organizers, etc. But here's the thing. As soon as Vince McMahon Jr. came into power, he's like, territories? It's like, what's up with that? I mean, why can't I work in California? Or why can't I work in Texas? Hell, I can do it too. And he started to pretty much sign other talent from other territories to the WWF, and then he would book that very talent in the different territories and promote them to like beat the companies that they used to work for pretty much. So it's pretty much like modern day capitalism, right? We know big companies, big tech companies, huge companies, you know, in the world, North America, whatever, they do this all the time, and that's how they make money. So it's kind of like ruthless aggression, so to speak. So this is what Vince was doing, right? But there are people telling his dad, it's like, you know, Vince is going to be in trouble if he does this. He's going to end up like in the bottom of the river or something like that. And like Vince is like, oh, these guys, they really like to talk about the bottom of the river. Vince is like, he's like just so like whatever about it. He doesn't give a shit basically. And that's it, you know. He basically conquered those territories, and he made all of the United States, Canada, and all that the WWF. I mean, you had WCW, which was more popular in the South, I guess, but pretty much Vince McMahon was the person known as killing the territories, which is pretty crazy. That's a pretty pivotal thing, and I don't know if you could fully fault him for that, to be honest. You know, you could have your opinions, of course, and you could say why, you know, and things like that. But, I mean, he's kind of right. It was business at the end of the day, and he saw opportunities where he could sign certain wrestlers and characters and make them his type of characters with his type of production and get them more money and more success. So can you really blame Vince McMahon Jr. for doing that? I'm not sure. I mean, could go either way on that one, I would say, kinda. But yeah, after that, WWF just got more and more popular into like the mid to late 80s. And that's when Hulkamania came, you know, the Hulkster, Hulk Hogan. He came into play, and that was basically Vince's biggest chess piece was Hulk Hogan at the time. And, you know, he pit Hulk Hogan against the Iron Sheik. Sheik was booked as the evil Iranian from Iran because there's real world conflict between the States and Iran at the time because Iran had American hostages or something like that. Sorry if I don't get that completely correct, but something like that. But basically, Netflix, the documentary covers this as well. You know, you have movies like Rocky IV, Drago from USSR versus Rocky Balboa from United States, Philly. Basically, in the 80s, we had the Cold War between Russia and United States. So Rocky IV was doing that. You had Back to the Future with the Libyans because Doc sold plutonium to them or something like that, right? So, again, like, I don't think you could totally knock Vince for this because people still do it today. I think it's a bit more taboo today, but especially back in the 80s and 90s, people were doing this like all the time. So, yeah, Vince booked Sheik as like the evil Iranian. I don't even know if like Sheik was from Iran, to be honest, but he did that and he got a lot of ratings from it. So that's just how it was. So I don't think you could totally blame Vince McMahon for doing that. And a lot of people found it entertaining, but that was a huge part of his success. You know, he wasn't shy to like show wrestling as pure entertainment. That was the thing about Vince Jr. Like before Vince Jr. with like Senior and all the territories, and you know, it leaned more towards pro wrestling. Like you had the match, you had the heel and the baby face, like the bad guy and the good guy. They would wrestle each other. You know, maybe the bad guy or the good guy would win. It could go either way, but it would usually be a match and that's it. But Vince would ramp it up with like the characters and, you know, I'm fighting for USA and you have our people and we're gonna win. And he would get all the crowd to chant USA, USA. You know, it's all about that over the top showmanship, pure entertainment. You know, the crazy music, the lighting again. It's just these characters are built so over the top and in such a big way. But the thing is, like, Vince still took it really serious. Like the way he would talk about the wrestlers when he was announcing or when he was giving the backstage interview, he would still like treat it like it was real, you know, even though it was so over the top, like a movie, like a Rocky IV or something where you kind of know, you know, at your baseline that this is entertainment and staged at the end of the day. So Vince McMahon was using Hogan as his main chess piece pretty much, and this was in the mid 80s and it was leading up to WrestleMania 1, which was Vince McMahon's idea for the top wrestling show of the year, akin like the NFL Super Bowl. So this is like the most popular wrestling event, one time a year. It's going to be stacked, the wrestling cards, celebrities, everything. And it really was a hell of a start because he got people like Cyndi Lauper and Mr. T. You know Mr. T from the A-Team, Cyndi Lauper, Girls Just Want to Have Fun. These are very popular celebrities at the time. So we got them. Of course, you have Hulk Hogan, who already did Rocky III at that point, so he's more popular than ever. They have people like Liberace, Muhammad Ali, reffing the main event. So there's all these stars. It's just like totally off the wall. They're getting crazy ratings. Lots of people are tuning in. It's basically like lightning in the bottle, but it made WWF like a super huge overnight success. And from that point on, like WWF was just like more and more popular than ever, And it was something like it was crazy. So that WrestleMania really launched WWF off the starting pad pretty much, but not without its controversy already. Well, its first known controversy, we could say. And that controversy has to do with a journalist and a talk show host. So we'll start with the journalist. His name is John Stossel, and he's the one that infamously went up to a wrestler interviewing him in the backstage. Now, before this, I think he was at WrestleMania or one of the events, and he was trying to expose the business. Like, he went up to Hulk Hogan, and he's like, "Oh, I heard you guys blade your forehead, and that's how you get color. That's how you get blood, right?" And Hogan's like, "Oh, I don't know what you're talking about, brother." And he went to like go rat to Vince McMahon and tell him right away. And then that happened. And then after that, Stossel was interviewing a wrestler called David Schultz backstage at an event. And he had the microphone and he was like asking David Schultz, he's like, "Well, I heard wrestling is fake. What do you think about that?" And he held the microphone to him. And David Schultz just like had this straight face to him, and all of a sudden he's like, boom, he just slaps him just like that. And the slap was freaking hard. Like he slapped the crap out of this guy to the point where he knocked him down. And then like Stossel's like kind of getting up, and I think like Schultz just slapped him again super hard, like while Stossel was on his knee getting up. So he's like kind of concussed. He's like, rocking back and forth. And David Schultz is like, "That seem fake to you? That feel fake, huh? Huh? Is wrestling fake now?" He's like talking shit to him. So that was crazy. And there is a saying called "F around and find out," and I kind of am akin to that. Like I believe it in a certain sense, but I mean, the guy is a journalist and he's asking like a journalist question, but you're also asking it to a wrestler who looks pretty pissed off and sweaty and all that already, so you are kind of playing with fire. So I could see either way, either argument from each side, you know what I mean? It's pretty crazy at the end of the day. But what's even more crazy, in my opinion, is the second incident where there was this talk show host and he had Hulk Hogan and Mr. T on a show, and him and Hulk were like trading barbs. You could tell there was like some tension between them. There wasn't good energy. He's like, "Okay, why don't you show me how real it is, pal?" And like Hulk's like, "Okay, well, come on up here." And Hulk is like standing off to the side. The talk show host goes to walk up to him, and Hulk basically puts this guy like in a standing guillotine choke. So he has him there. He's like, "Yo, T, just let me know when I let him go, brother." And you see this guy's body just go like completely limp, like in Hogan's arms. And as soon as he goes limp, like Hogan just like lays off a little bit pressure, and then the guy's body, like totally ragdoll physics, just goes all the way back, and he hits his head hard on the ground. And there's no exercise mats, there's no padding, no nothing. They didn't prep for this. So the back of his head hits the hard ground, and you could see blood coming out, like dark red blood. And this is like in the mid 80s or something like that. The technology and the camera work wasn't super high def or anything like that. It wasn't high def at all. But you could tell this guy was bleeding and he was out of it. So that was crazy. Like that got Hogan in pretty big trouble, I believe, from Vince. But it was just insane that would happen, you know what I mean? Like blood was gushing from his head, and it's just like, pure lunacy at that point. But, at the end of the day, like both John Stossel and that late night host ended up suing WWF at the time, and they ended up getting a settlement. So, by getting a settlement, that's basically the World Wrestling Federation admitting that they were in wrongdoing of that lawsuit, of that issue. You know what I mean? So that's that. But, that's not the only scandal that happened. Oh no. We're just getting warmed up, because there's more to come, And at the end of this episode, we get a little snippet of the Netflix doc, and you see Vince in the big, that big neck brace, and Linda's with him. They're going up to the courthouse, and this is basically Vince and the World Wrestling Federation against the United States government for the steroid trial. So I really liked this first episode. I thought it was great. I dug it, man. Like, I thought Netflix as well, they did a fair and good job at showing both sides of Vince McMahon. They showed his accolades, the good stuff he accomplished, the hard working, etc. But they also showed his bad side. They had to halt production for the litigations, for the things that came up. We had the stuff about John Stossel, the Late Show host, how Vince was cutthroat in many ways, and some of the interviewees showed that as well. So we're getting both sides of the fence here, which was what I really want to see. I was afraid when I first heard about this documentary that it was going to be a glamorization piece. They were just going to show the good stuff about Vince McMahon and what a great guy he is and what he accomplished. And while he accomplished a lot of good things, I believe there has to be a justification of truth here, especially with the litigations, pen to paper, everything that we've learned, the victims, all that stuff. I think there's just like a just cause to hear the truth, you know what I mean? And we need to see that, so it's cool. It's cool so far. The first episode was really good. And I'm pretty excited for Netflix to show, they're already out, the other episodes, but for me to watch the other 4 or 5 episodes that I have left. And it just feels like, such a roller coaster ride. I want to see how Netflix handles this roller coaster ride. Like, I feel like we just got onto the ride, put our seatbelts on, we went up the first climb, and then we had the crazy drop, we went down, and now we're going up for more. And we're climbing again, episode 2. It's probably going to be a crazy, insane drop, and we're going to go up again. Up, down, up, down. So it's going to be a crazy roller coaster ride. But I'm all for it. It's super fun, super exciting, and it's just cool to talk about too. So if you have comments about this, please drop it down in the comments below. I'm always down to chat about it and discuss, or what opinions people might have, good, bad. Doesn't matter. Like, if you like Vince, if you don't like him, it's all good. If you like my take, if you don't like my take, you could like the video, you could dislike the video. Either way, I'm cool with it. Just do either one. Like or dislike, either way is cool. I don't mind. It's just the interaction that truly matters at the end of the day. So let me know what you think, your comments, what you think of my breakdown and my analysis on this episode 1 Junior of the Vince McMahon Netflix documentary. Let me know how it is. Let me know what you think about it and your opinions. We could always chat in the comments below, like I said before. And I'm just excited for episode 2. I just have to, cleanse my soul and my mind after watching that and after breaking down this video, because I just feel, like you need a good long shower after, watching and breaking down a video like that, because it is pretty crazy. But we're still on this roller coaster ride, and I'm in it for the full Monty, the full bore, up and down, all the adrenaline, and it's gonna be good. So also, y'all stay sane till then, stay out of trouble, and until then, we will join for number 2 of the Vince McMahon documentary.